And we're live. Welcome to episode 7 of our Global Climate Change Society podcast. I am your host, Lucas Carboni, coordinating lead author of the Working Group 1 contribution to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, joined by climate scientist experts Fiona Hunter, Hannah James, local farmer Pierce O'Connor, and criminal justice delegates Stephen Drangwitz and Logan O'Neill. The world as we know it is undergoing rapid climate change, with greenhouse gas emissions exceeding 35 billion tonnes and our planet warming by 1.1 degrees Celsius since the 1800s. So our experts are here with us today, representing the biggest issues caused by climate change in Western Australia. How are you guys doing today?
Hey guys, it's great to be here. I'm an expert in the water balance in Western Australia and find the effect climate change will have on aquifers in the southwestern region of Australia extremely worrying.
Hello, good to be here guys. I'm an expert in marine and coastal science and I've studied the impacts of climate change on the coast of Western Australia for many years.
Good day lads, I grew up on my granddad's farm in Beverley, a small town in the heart of the wheat belt region just outside Perth.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. I'm a conservation officer studying environmental crime in Western Australia.
Howdy, good to be here. I'm a climate crime analyst who's been studying the ongoing situation of climate change in Western Australia.
So today we're going to be discussing Western Australia in order to reach our target of 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030, as discussed in the Paris Agreement. Mitigation and conversion from fossil fuels to renewables as a source of energy is a must if we are to meet our targets. And by not doing so, and even exceeding 2 degrees Celsius, we risk irreversible changes to certain large-scale ecosystems. More specifically, when we look into Western Australia, such as coastal flooding from sea level rise or ocean acidification, more pressure is put onto these ecosystems. Moreover, 75% of people who reside in Western Australia live in Perth, where they may experience these climatic changes to coastal and marine systems in abundance.
As an expert in marine and coastal science, I'm certain that sea levels will continue to rise during the 21st century, and the oceans will become more and more acidic, and the rate of ocean acidification will be proportional to carbon dioxide emissions.
And to our listeners who may not be aware of this process, can you tell us why it's happening, Hannah?
Well, because of anthropogenic activities, there are increased levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, so there is more carbon dioxide dissolving in the ocean. The ocean's average pH is now around 8.1, which is alkaline, but as the ocean continues to absorb more carbon dioxide, the pH decreases and the ocean becomes more acidic.
And what are future projections for sea temperature?
That's a good question. I'd say around by 2090, coastal waters are projected to warm by at least 1.5 to even 3.9 degrees, which goes to show that we'll definitely be looking at a future of warmer and more acidic oceans. As a result of these predicted higher temperatures, the coast of Western Australia is expected to experience a tropicalisation of the marine community in the future. This basically means that there'll be an increasing dominance of warmer water species, which will be predicted to have large ecological and economic implications.
That's really interesting, and I'm sure our listeners may be wondering about terrestrial changes as well.
Yeah, so I can tell you that higher temperatures also cause reduced rainfall throughout the southwest of Australia, and there's been significant drying since 1970. This is especially true in autumn and early winter. This rainfall decline has been the largest in all of Australia, and by 2030, rainfall is expected to decrease by up to 15%, which will have major environmental impacts on the whole country. To add to that, I recently read an interesting study funded by the Australian government predicting recharge rates of aquifers will be reduced between 33 and 49%. Reduced recharge rates will cause seawater intrusion and subsequently cause a loss of fresh water.
Okay, one of the 5 reasons for concern, as stated in the IPCC, is the distribution of impact. So I have to ask you, is this the case for the whole of Western Australia?
Actually, no, it's different in the northern region where rainfall is actually increasing and causing more severe cyclones, showing how climate change affects Western Australia and aquifers differently, whereas in the northwest, flooding is more of an issue for us. I personally find this all quite worrying, how climate change affects rainfall differently in different parts of Western Australia.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Common perception people have with Western Australia is that it's boiling hot and it never rains. So for our students listening who are thinking of going there for a gap year, you better watch out for those squashy tan lines. Am I right, Piers?
Yeah mate, I know those squashy tan lines all too well, but thankfully the weather is perfect for agriculture, so students needn't worry about their avocado and toast. Southwestern Australia possesses the most arable land in the country, hence the term wheat belt, and wheat production is perfectly suited to the Mediterranean climate covering Southwestern Australia, allowing us to be the 10th largest wheat producer in the world.
Interesting, and just following up on Fiona's point regarding rainfall and aquifers, Considering agriculture obtains a large portion of its irrigation from groundwater and aquifers, am I right to assume agriculture has been majorly affected by these changes?
I can see why you think that, but actually no. Despite the Western Australian wheat belt experiencing more rainfall decline than any other wheat cropping region in Australia, changes in rainfall, temperature and atmospheric CO2 have had a relatively little impact on wheat yields, with only about a 10% decrease in yield production despite the 20% rainfall reduction.
Oh really? I didn't expect that. Do you know why that is?
Well, there are four main reasons which are currently active solutions, aside from my excellent farming skills, of course. Firstly, wheat has a low evapotranspiration demand during the cooler winter months, in which the rainfall decline has mostly occurred. Secondly, given Western Australia's unpredictable weather, such as the frequent flash floods we farmers often adopt to, we don't increase inputs such as fertilizer to obtain the higher yields we possibly could obtain during the winter months. Thirdly, regarding Fiona's aquifers point, Western Australian soils have a low water retention capacity anyway, so a large amount of the water is lost below the root zone of the crops. And lastly, the primary reason for the low impact climate change has had on wheat production is because farmers are fighting harder than ever to retain yields. Research and development in crop modifications such as faster maturity rates, crop heat resistance, and better farming practices has kept us stable. These efforts are highly important as a large portion of Western Australia's economy relies on agriculture. However, as these weather extremes become the norm, this balance is getting more difficult by the day, and more support and research is needed.
That's a very interesting insight into wheat production, Piers, and to touch upon your last point regarding urgent adaptation to climate change, that's quite reflective of most aspects of the economy and society today. And now, to discuss different perceptions of climate issues, we have a few questions from a live listener chat for our criminal justice delegates, Logan and Stephen. So David from Brighton asks, what do you feel is the biggest contributor to crime in Western Australia?
Well, that's a great question. The crime rates have increased 72,000 since last year, and this is widely due to the increase in temperature due to climate change. This increase in temperature indirectly affects the crime rates by increasing the amount of people that are out and about, which affect more people who are affected by crime.
Interesting. Another listener asks, do you think the current rate of climate change has a linear reflection on crime rate in Western Australia?
Yes, I do. At the rate that climate change is occurring, it is shown that this directly influences the increase of crime at a rate that is almost linear. Like Logan said, when temperatures get higher, it increases irritability within people. This is known as the temperature aggression hypothesis.
Cardiff from Tijuana wants to know, what do you think the solutions to this problem are?
Well, the obvious answer is hotspot policing, no pun intended, allocating more resources towards areas of drought and high heat so that we can reduce the amount of crime present. I also feel that harsher laws and regulations on companies located within Western Australia could help reduce the emissions and abuse of the water table that is currently going on.
Lucinda from Scotland is asking, do you think this issue applies on a global scale?
Yes, great question. I think all of these issues are not just occurring in our area of research. Climate change affects the entire planet, which in turn causes crime to increase in areas affected by climate change. A theory that can also help us explain this is routine activity theory. This is when the offender takes into account his or her surroundings for suitable targets to commit a crime. An example of this would be in winter months when it is colder, outside activities will decrease. And with warmer months, outside activities will increase, creating more interactions with individuals and victim availability.
And finally, Jane from London is asking, why do you think this issue is so often overlooked with the current state of the world?
I feel it is overlooked because people don't realize how our environment shapes how we act. The temperature, when it's increased, can increase irritability and make people more likely to engage in criminal behaviors, therefore increasing the crime in areas affected by climate change, which is the whole world. People may lose their jobs or farmland due to climate change, and this causes strain, which can cause people to commit different types of crime to make ends meet.
Those are very interesting answers. Thank you very much to our American delegates. And now, what all our listeners have been waiting for, it's Solution Fast. Realistically, adequate mitigation and adaptive solutions are a must if we are to combat the climate crisis. RCPs, which are short for representative concentration pathways, are different projections for greenhouse gas emissions over the next 100 years, which are based on our responses to the climate crisis. If we are to have extensive mitigation, we can stay consistent with RCP 2.6, which would stay in line with our 2.0 degrees Celsius target, as opposed to doing absolutely nothing to combat climate change, which we actually could be heading towards RCP 8.5, potentially putting us in a terrible situation. The way in which we resolve these issues play a vital role in the benefits of these responses. What specific techniques should policymakers target in Western Australia?
And Lucas, as a farmer, I know absolutely nothing about those RCP and climate model gizmos Fiona mentioned, but it sounds like we're doomed and headed for RCP 8.5.
Don't worry, the most effective way to limit ocean acidification is to act on climate change, implementing solutions to dramatically reduce the use of fossil fuels. We can do this by dramatically cutting our global carbon dioxide emissions and limit future warming, which will significantly reduce the harm to marine ecosystems.
Oh, that's a good idea. I could definitely see why that would work. What about the solutions to terrestrial issues?
Well, I completely agree with Hannah. We need to act on climate change first, to in turn help preserve the aquifers. Hopefully by reducing emissions, the rainfall will be easier to predict, and so it reduces the risk of drought and keeps the groundwater flowing. Legislation on water management from the Australian government has been brought in to help protect the aquifers, as they are so essential for drinking water supplies, irrigation, industrial development and ecosystems, and streamflow maintenance.
Those are all very valid points, and realistically the solutions are all there, and it is possible to make change for the better in terms of how we approach the climate crisis, but ultimately it's the willingness of politicians to listen to climate scientists and take on this extra weight on their shoulders. But this is a topic for our next podcast, and thank you for listening.